Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, before we begin our interviews at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, I'd like to come on and kind of review a couple of important issues that come across our desk throughout the week. But these two issues came across our desk, one yesterday and one tonight. In fact, the one tonight, I don't know if this has been broadcasted or will ever be broadcasted to the Canadian people via your own Canadian broadcasting company. So here's what we have, folks. Tonight, the media ran a story that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, apparently sent a tweet out to rock star singer Taylor Swift. Now, the Canadian Prime Minister sends this tweet out suggesting that of the many countries that she's going to perform in, she ought to come to Canada. Now, of course, Justin Trudeau thinks he's the greatest guy on earth, and there's no doubt in my mind there was more to this than just come on and sing your songs in our country. But that's besides the point. But what made the news was Taylor Swift's response, pretty much telling the Prime Minister, put your fires out first, something along those lines. In other words, she was telling the Prime Minister, you ought to keep an eye on your country. You ought to be concerned about the fires that you have in your country instead of concerned about me singing in your country. And I got to tell you, folks, it's astonishing that there are many, many problems in Canada. The wildfires are out of control, and the Prime Minister is on his phone tweeting Taylor Swift. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. So this guy, once again, Justin Trudeau, reveals who he is. And who is he? Well, he's ilk. That's what he is. Absolute ilk. It's like Joe Biden in the United States of America, which leads me to the second story. We find out, we the American people find out, that cocaine, of all things, cocaine was discovered in the White House. Now, of course, people immediately jumped and said, well, this had to be Hunter Biden. It had to be his drugs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we just don't know yet. When I say we, the American people, just don't know yet where that cocaine came from, who brought it into the White House. So there's a lot of theories, okay, a lot of conclusions being drawn, not on fact. But here's what astonishes me. I've been in the White House a few times. I've been in Washington a lot. I've worked with intelligence agencies, FBI, military, and I know this, that it is very difficult for anyone to even get into the White House without somebody knowing you even had a piece of gum on you. Believe me, folks. You go through x-ray machines, you go through all sorts of security checks. There are cameras in hallways, cameras in offices, cameras all over the place. And the United States government, the White House, wants us to believe that they have no idea how the cocaine got there. Either this is a catastrophic, epic failure on the part of Secret Service, or they're just trying to pull the wool over our eyes as usual. So I don't know what to make of it right now, other than we're being lied to. At least that's my view, my opinion, that there's a massive cover-up going on. You see, this is what sickens our government. They always point fingers at conservatives and say, there they go again, conspiracy theorists, they're claiming a cover-up, on and on and on. Well, if you don't bring facts to the people, if you're not transparent about things that are going on, and especially if you're not guilty of anything, you're going to hold a press conference and you're going to tell the people exactly what this is all about. Good, bad, or indifferent. Tell them the truth. I think the people of America deserve the truth when it comes to the President of the United States and the place he lives. So whose cocaine was it? Who brought it in? Did Joe Biden know? Maybe not. Was it Hunter Biden's? Who knows? And on and on and on and on. So you got to give them enough time to figure out how they're going to spin this story. And then they're going to come before the American people of the world and say, well, you know what? Here's exactly what happened. No big deal. But it is a big deal now because the Congress is going to get involved. And other law enforcement agencies outside the realm of the White House are going to get involved. And remember what I've been saying all along, folks. Stay the course. Work within the framework of the law. We win, they lose. As proven by the United States Supreme Court on several decisions this week involving the government trying to take the rights and liberties and freedoms away from the American people. Just a few hours ago, I should say maybe 48 or 72 hours ago, and this should warm the hearts of the Canadian people because you're going through this now. We had a version, or shall I say, the White House under Biden had a version of C-18, not in legislation, but in simply putting pressure on social media outlets to censor their platforms. So if Campaign for America came on the air and decided to criticize Joe Biden and the White House, well, the White House would say to any social media platform that, well, we don't like that. Well, we don't like what Lieutenant Rogers is saying. Take him off the air. That's what it boiled down to. Well, it backfired because not the United States Supreme Court at this point, a federal district court judge ruled that that was illegal. It was a violation of the constitutional rights of the people. And the judge went on to say it was Orwellian in nature. In other words, think about this, folks. The judge just didn't rule against the government, but he pretty much said this isn't a dictatorship here. You have absolutely no right to interfere with the free speech of people, especially with private companies. Now, of course, Joe Biden's going to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court, but our belief is that the Supreme Court will uphold the lower court's decision, as they have on multiple issues this past week. Day by day, hour by hour, the Democrats, the liberals in this country are losing their power, one by one. And believe me, folks, as we move forward in these election cycles that are coming up, the Democrats hopefully are going to become a party that is going to be sent to the ash bin of history because people are fed up. Local level, state level, county level, and national level. The people of this country are fed up. And thank God Almighty, they've begun to take action together in order to put a stop to this insanity that has corrupted this government and just about every agency that's connected to the government, including our military, by the way. And one night we'll get into that. But why do I say this should be an encouragement to the Canadian people? Because, folks, your parliament members are watching what's happening here. And believe me, those parliament members, once they see some of these politicians in this country end up going to prison, hopefully, well, watch the dominoes fall. No one's going to go down with a president or a prime minister or even a dictator without being willing to sing like a songbird. Everybody wants to make a deal when the ship is sinking. Keep that in mind. But more importantly, within the framework of the law, no riots, no civil disobedience, nothing of a sort. It's good to have rallies, all right? It's good to have rallies because you're heightening public awareness of the problems and issues that we are facing as a free people. But remember this, once the rally is over, once the demonstration is over, that's it. It just went past the news cycle, over and done with. Bingo. But when you take action like a lot of these mothers and fathers did with regard to school districts, when you take action like what a lot of the people in each community across America are now doing, that news cycle don't go away. What goes away are the enemies of freedom and liberty. And to the credit of the Canadian people, you had a national citizens inquiry. You're going to be hearing from the attorney in a minute of that inquiry. A man named Shawn Buckely, who not only was the attorney of counsel on the national citizens inquiry, but also helped create it, form it, put it together, and rally Canadians together across Canada with his team in order to do what? To peacefully, within the framework of the law, bring out truth, bring out a lot of truth to people not only in Canada, but around the world about what's going on in that country with a lot of political issues. So let's get right to it. I actually recorded my interview with him earlier. Going to be two parts to this, folks. Part one tonight, part two next week. In fact, we might even have another part. He had so much valuable information. So you're going to see for the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk to Shawn Buckely. And then The second half hour, we're going to have an American guest, Dr. Douglas Frank, on. A little bit of a fascinating story he'll tell you about what's going on this side of the border. All right, so let's go right now to Attorney Shawn Buckely. Gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Shawn Buckely. Shawn is really one of those great, and I know he's probably going to be modest and not going to want to hear this, but one of those heroic Canadians out on the front lines, working very hard to bring facts, credible information, and actionable information to not only people in Canada, but around the world with regard to the challenges that the Canadian people are having with their government. He's also been very instrumental, if not the guy, that has created the National Citizens Inquiry with a team of great, great people. Well, Shawn, thanks for joining me tonight.
Stephen, I'm so pleased to be on your show.
Well, Shawn, can you share with the people, not only across your country, but across the United States and around the world at this point, just how you came out to develop the National Citizens Inquiry? I don't think anywhere on the planet something like this has ever been done in the history of any country from a non-governmental organization.
No, so in fact, just so that your viewers are aware of what the National Citizens Inquiry did, and this is totally grassroots. So it's a group of citizens got together with this idea that the government is not going to hold a fair inquiry into itself and how it handled COVID-19 matters. And so we basically organized. We appointed 4 independent commissioners. You go onto our website and see the rules. We can't touch them once they're appointed and just become this administrative group. And we marched them across the country. So 8 different cities, 8 different provinces, literally coast to coast. And now and 24 days of hearings. All of the witnesses sworn under oath and their evidence led by lawyers. And we've had 300 witnesses. And so we've had the world-class experts, but more importantly, we've had the voices of ordinary Canadians. And I'll go into that a little later. Your question was, how did we come up with this idea? And actually, it's a little vague, Stephen, because what happened is just some people, myself included, like maybe there were 10 of us, came up with this idea to hold 3 days of hearings. Just to show that there's a different government narrative to the COVID issue, much like Senator Johnson has in the United States, where he's had several days over time of calling people as witnesses just to demonstrate that there's a different narrative. So we did that. We put on 3 days of hearings. We called that the citizens' hearings. And again, people weren't under oath. They weren't led by lawyers or anything like that. It was much more informal. But it really resonated. And then so after that, we thought, well, why don't we do something bigger? Because I don't know what the experience was like in the United States other than, what I gleaned from media sources. But it was really dark here. And just the ramifications of the government actions, we don't even understand them yet. And so we thought, well, there's no way any level of government in Canada is going to hold a fair inquiry in what has been the most significant experience in our lives. So the citizens have to do it. Now we did not appreciate, how large of an undertaking this was. So fortunately, we were a little naive. So we entered into the project, and then God really had to jump in and just take it over. So, but we just came up with this idea. Why don't we have an independent commission? So, you just look at, well, how do government's commissions run themselves? What are their rules? Let's adapt it for a citizens inquiry. And then, basically start finding volunteers to do everything from, A to Z. So we have to select commissioners. Well, what are you looking for? And you put the word out, and then people, are nominated, and then you start sorting through and interviewing. It was quite something. But just the idea is that we couldn't get a fair inquiry otherwise. And you're right, we're not aware of anywhere else in the world where citizens have actually held a independent inquiry. And, if people want to go to the nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, I would start with the Toronto hearings, our second set of hearings. That's when we started to become a kind of a community, and we got things a little more sorted out. But if you watch a full day of the hearings, you won't be the same person afterwards. And if you start watching them all, your understanding of what happened will change. Like I thought I knew what was going on, not a chance.
Unfiltered, nobody scripted, nobody subpoenaed, forced to give information. How is it that you were able to get that many people across your country to come and testify in view of the fact, at least in our view, that the Canadian government was bullying people, intimidating people, threatening people? I mean, we saw things on video in this country regarding how the Canadian government was reacting to peaceful people in your country. It was shocking. I mean, absolutely shocking. The only place, Shawn, that I recall seeing such action against peaceful protesters was when the Chinese Communist military moved into Hong Kong. Never seen, of course, what happened there was a greater magnitude than what happened in Canada. But that's the beginning of something that could be terrible for your country. But what you guys did was showed the world that you could do things peacefully. You could challenge these serious problems that the government is causing for the lives and the destiny of your country in a peaceful manner. So how's it that you got 300 plus people to testify across your country?
Well, so first of all, let me comment on the truckers convoy, because just so your viewers, I mean, everyone knows about the truckers convoy, and in Canada, our media was just displaying it as this, lawless, bunch of misogynist, racists, blah blah blah, like just totally denigrating. But it was the most peaceful protest likely in the history of the world, and one of the largest, with zero violence, zero racism. In fact, it was a celebration because people had been in such darkness, and then all of a sudden they're standing together peacefully. And then to watch. So you say it was horrific to watch. Well, you were watching from another country when it was happening to us, when we were seeing, these rows of masked police, dragging, one person at a time out of the crowd, and basically just brutalizing people. We had at the National Citizens Inquiry one of the the people that was instrumental in negotiating between the truckers, and so he was a leader of the trucker movement, Tom Marazzo. He showed a video of a friend of his, a veteran. So the veterans were at the war memorial, which is about a block and a half from Parliament Hill, and they made it clear to these armed thugs that they were not, meaning the police, that they were going to be peaceful. They weren't going to fight. And we watched a video of a wounded Afghan vet being thrown to the ground and the boots put to him by the police. I'm sorry, I'm getting upset just talking.
Listen, listen. That I certainly understand, and I know people watching understand. I've been in law enforcement for 38 years. I commanded police units, worked at times in conjunction with the New York City Police Department, who are probably the best police department in the world. I've never seen the New York City Police Department, the NYPD, take the actions against people. And we have pretty violent protests here, as you know, very violent protests. But even with all of the violence, the police know how to deal with these issues in a very strategic and tactical manner without using excessive force. Now, sometimes it happens, but for the most part, it doesn't. And I've got to tell you, Shawn, some of the NYPD officers I spoke with and showed some of these videos to were shocked. They actually believed, again, that they were watching some sort of a communist country or a Hollywood movie play out. But to that end, the people of your country still acted in a peaceful manner. I did not see any police officers get assaulted. I did not see.
I don't think there was a single. I don't think there was a single police officer injured. So it was only the citizens that were injured. And what you don't know, Stephen, and it came out from a couple of different people who testified at the National Citizens Inquiry, including Tom Marazzo, is so the government invoked the Emergency Act, which is really meant for wartime where you've been invaded, or there's truly an insurrection, and like that's your last ditch emergency way of dealing with it. It's just, okay, we'll suspend civil liberties and we'll deal with this crisis and then get on. Well, they invoked that, and And the leadership told the government, we'll disband the protest. So all of that was unnecessary. So the trucker convoy was in the process of dissolving because they didn't want to have this stand down with the police. So it's even worse when you understand that just this show of violence and show of force and show of control was truly that. It wasn't even then to get rid of the truckers, because the truckers had communicated through several channels that they were now in the process of disengaging. So the whole thing's even worse.
Well, Shawn, the two videos that shocked me the most. One was when I believe it was Pastor Arthur was in his church, and it seemed
Arthur
like,
Pulaski, yes.
yeah, Pulaski. I'm sorry. Yeah, it seemed like Nazi stormtroopers coming into. I mean, a church service. Give me a break. The guy's unarmed. He's in a church service. They went in there, and it ended up in a shouting match, and they attempted to execute a arrest on him from behind the pulpit. That was stunning. But one other video I saw that really was stunning. There was a trucker who had been blocked in by a police vehicle behind him. And the officer approaches the trucker sitting in his seat. That's the trucker in the driver's seat. And the officer is telling him to leave. And the trucker's saying, I'm trying to leave, but you got me blocked in. I can't get out. If you move your car back, I'll leave. And the officer keeps on yelling at him to leave. But here's what really stunned me. Another police officer went in front of that truck and drew his weapon and pointed it directly through the windshield at that young trucker. Stunning. In this country, the officer and his supervisor would have been fired and they would have been charged. I mean, you just don't do that. So, my point in bringing this up is this. What the truckers proved and what you certainly memorialized through the testimony given at the inquiry was that it was the government that overreacted. It was the government that was using excessive force against peaceful people. And the entire planet saw this. This was Trudeau's nightmare. This was the nightmare of those who support Trudeau. They didn't expect all these videos to get out. They didn't expect all this action to be taken by people around the country in Canada. And the one thing I know they didn't expect is for those of us in the United States to try to lead the charge to get that information out, information you have, by the way, through your inquiry, to people around our country and especially our lawmakers. And this is a question I'm going to ask you because this is a question I've answered to the people in America. The people in America have asked, well, why are we so involved in exposing all of this that's going on in Canada? And my answer is simply this. Because what we have seen happen in Canada is becoming a clear and present danger to the security of the United States of America. Because if the police could get away with what they're doing in your country, to your people in a free country, God knows what's next. So in your view, and I know it's your view and your opinion, based on what you've heard and seen, do we have concerns here to think about in the United States of America regarding what I believe has become your government taking the playbook of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, of the Chinese Communist Party and using it against your people?
Let me answer your question by sharing with you what most Canadians don't view as a police state ritual, and maybe most Americans don't, and they don't understand the psychology of it. And it's relevant because the World Health Organization is just adopting these digital health passports. So, because I think to answer your question, you need to understand that Canadians are being groomed to live in a police state. So before this pandemic, we were relatively free. So, you wanted to go to a restaurant, you just went to a restaurant. You wanted to go to your kid's hockey game, you just went to your kid's hockey game. You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't have there's no way you and I would be having a conversation about just being free to go to your kid's hockey game, for example. And that's the sign of freedom when you don't even have to think about doing something. You want to do it, so you choose to do it. During the pandemic, we were introduced to the police state ritual of having to show identity papers. So if you wanted to go to a restaurant or if you wanted to go to your kid's hockey game, you had to get 2 shots of the COVID vaccine and get issued a government digital passport. They called it a health passport, but it's identity papers. And so you would have to go through the police state ritual of showing your identity papers. Now, when I call it a police state ritual, it's important for your viewers to understand. When police states have a roadblock, it's actually not to impede your travel. It's to reinforce in your mind that you're no longer free. And I'll explain that in a second. But, let's go to Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, where in big cities at major intersections, at times they would have roadblocks. They didn't actually care whether you went from one sector of the city to the next. And they knew where you lived. If they needed to track you down, they knew where you were sleeping. Like they knew where your home was. But what it does is if you have to go and show your ID papers to go to a hockey game, you're basically subconsciously acknowledging that you're not free to choose to do that, but you have to go through an action, a ritual, so that the state grants you permission. So what this does, this showing of identity papers, is every time you do that, it reinforces that you are not a free person. You're not free to undertake that activity, but that you are actually a slave and that your master, the state, is granting you permission through this ritual. And it's important for people to understand that because, in grocery stores in the UK right now, you're actually now needing an app, a passport to scan to get in, to get food. And this is all coming. Like in some of our grocery stores in Canada, they now have turnstiles. I mean, they're just there to condition us for when they put the locking ones in. So we're being conditioned in Canada to basically accept total control over our lives and the imposition of a police state. And so, it's kind of a rhetorical question. How does that end well for us, let alone any of our neighbors?
That's probably one of the best explanations I've heard in all the people I've interviewed regarding how it's shaping out in your country. I've never heard somebody say that you're being groomed.
That's what these rituals are. And that's why, because digital IDs are coming to the United States. This isn't a Canadian idea. This is an international idea that just our current government in Canada is totally all in the international agenda.
All right, folks. So this is part one of a two-part series. As you can see, it's fascinating. We will have Shawn on next week with regards to specifically the information and evidence that they collected during the National Citizens Inquiry. So at the moment, folks, what I'm going to do is we're going to switch over to Dr. Douglas Frank. He's going to share with you some of the issues that have been taking place in America with regard to our government's activities, pretty similar to yours. But isn't this guy, Shawn Buckely, fascinating for the American audience? Think about what he's saying. When I've been talking about Canada becoming a national security risk to the United States, I think he pretty well laid it out. And next week, you're going to hear a lot more about why we've been saying that the Canadian government is becoming a national security threat to the United States. What a fascinating guy. All right, let's get to Dr. Douglas Frank, folks. You'll find him pretty interesting. To you, our next guest, Dr. Douglas Frank. Dr. Frank, thank you for joining me. And if you'd be so kind to share with our audience your background, who you are, and the great work you're doing. Really good work.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Honored to be with you, sir. We just had Memorial Day, so thank you for your service as well, sir.
Thank you.
Even though we aren't remembering you. But anyway, good to be with you. I'm Doug Frank. People call me Dr. Frank. I got into this most recent work I'm doing starting about 2.5 years ago at the invitation of the Pennsylvania State Legislature. They asked me to look at their election, the committee in the House, committee in the Senate. And during that time, I discovered a massive amount of fraud. It wasn't just me. I was part of a team of about 6 people. And to my horror, they covered it all up. And that was sort of my awakening moment when I realized that our elections are a mess and our legislatures aren't going to fix them. But nevertheless, I spent most of 2021 after that traveling state to state, meeting with legislatures, testifying before legislatures, meeting with legislators, secretaries of states, attorneys general. And most of them already know what the problems are and they aren't going to address them. And so I kind of had to learn the lesson coming from academics. I'm a physicist, PhD physicist, and coming from academics, I thought that truth and logic and evidence mattered. And so I would present that to legislators and expect things to happen. And forgive me for being naive, but I learned that lesson in 2021. And then I spent all of 22 starting from the grassroots up. And so I've been traveling the country now for better part of 2 years, almost every day, meeting with county teams around the country, teaching them how to expose fraud in their own county, and then that causing pressure and moving up the ladder up to the county level and the state level around the country. And it's been really quite an adventure. I've met patriots in just about every state. 2 years ago, I was pretty depressed. I thought we were in pretty bad shape as a country. We still are in pretty bad shape, but I'm much more optimistic now because I see that they're on fire all over the country. One last thing about me. The other day, Colonel Shawn Smith, retired from the Air Force, he said, Dr. Frank is the Johnny Appleseed of election integrity. And so he's sort of right. I've been going around county to county around the country planting seeds, except that I'm not planting seeds. I'm starting little bonfires. And then I come back and I throw gasoline on those bonfires. But it's still, in principle, that's basically what I'm doing around the country. Good to be with you.
This is refreshing and fascinating because, frankly, Dr. Frank, no pun intended, frankly.
I've only heard that about 7,000 times.
Okay. The American people, I believe, are just worn out over all the conspiracy theories,
Yes.
over information being disseminated that is based on nothing, no fact. I've heard it all. I'm sure you have. And people are of the opinion that, well, why don't I just give up and not vote? But here you come along. And what I find fascinating about what you're doing is you're not carrying the message for somebody else. You're the guy. I mean, you're there on the ground talking to the people, the election officials, and you're going state by state, county by county. You're really, really drilling down. So if you could help me out a little bit. So you would actually, let's say there's a municipal government, a small one, all right? They could actually call you and say, can you teach us on how to detect election fraud?
Yes, but it's usually not the city government that's calling me. It's usually a group of concerned citizens within a county or within a city, and they're like, we know something's wrong. Or maybe it's somebody who they've recently had an election and everybody something smells funny about it. And they'll call me up and say, will you please come, Dr. Frank? And I never say no. And I don't charge for any of my work. Everything I do, all I do is ask for people to cover my travel expenses. And so I show up, I bring with me an analysis of their city, an analysis of their county, an analysis of their state. I give them copies of their voter rolls that show them which doors to knock on. And I help them find fraud. And what do I mean by fraud? There's a lot of people running around the country saying, oh, our voter rolls are dirty. That's not fraud. It's true. The voter rolls are dirty. I was just in Kentucky last week. They have 105% of their people registered. Yeah, their rolls are dirty, very dirty. They're full of inactive voters. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that somebody with high school level hacking ability can get into the state rolls, find out who's not voted, of which there's a lot, if you have a lot of people that are not active voters in the rolls, and put ballots in for them. You're stuffing ballots for them. And so that's the main way of stealing our elections that's happening. So I teach people how to find those people, and we collect a pile of those. You take them to the city leaders or the county clerks or the county election officials, and you show it to them, and then they have no wiggle room, especially if they're people that have been dead for 10 years, but you're getting ballots from them, or people that have moved away 10 years ago, live in another state, and you're getting ballots from them. And that's also the point at which we typically bring the sheriff in, and we can talk about that some more. But that's what I do. And what I'm really doing is I'm empowering the citizens to retake their elections. The problem with our elections across the whole country is that the states have centralized the control of them. So every state in our country now, every state, I'll say that strongly and confidently because I know it to be the case, has centralized their elections. They're controlling them centrally. And what happens is that takes away control from the local clerks, and they are not able to police their own elections. And so it makes them very vulnerable.
All right. So the good thing is, because people don't trust government, you've kept government out of the equation at the initial stage of this. So now you have a
Yes.
group of citizens.
Yep.
So the first question is, and I know I would be asked this, does a citizen have to have any special skills? I mean, do they have to have any skills at all to do the work that you are educating them to do?
Yes and no. What I found is that I myself have made this mistake, and every once in a while I fall back into it. So it's a mistake that everybody makes. We all seem to think that if we have the evidence, that's all we need. No. I've presented the evidence at the state level to 24 secretaries of states. They know they're not going to fix it. So it turns out that this is not about evidence. This is about a movement. So, in other words, we need to build a movement. For example, recently in Shasta County, California, Northern California, we got them to get rid of all their voting machines, all their electronic poll books. They're going back to completely paper poll books, paper ballots, hand counting, transparent reporting. How did we do that? By smarty pants coming into town with all the evidence? No. I empower them with their own evidence that they find themselves to go to their own leadership and then say, look, here's a whole stack of people who did not vote in our election, but you counted ballots for them. This is not acceptable. We want to get rid of these systems. Then what happens is that, for example, in Shasta, I brought it up, the county supervisors say, go away, go away. All right. So then the people raise more awareness in the communities and pack the supervisor meetings every month and fill into the hallways and start picketing out in front of the buildings and bring the sheriff in, who has tremendous authority. In other words, it's not the evidence that wins the day. You need the evidence to build the movement, but what you get the movement's what wins the day, because the movement pressures the supervisors to take action.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you. So you go to your county officials and they say, well, look, like you said, go away. We don't have nothing to do with you. Yeah. But boy, I'll tell you, you really brought this into perspective. You can have all the evidence in the world, but if no one's willing to look at it and dismissing it, well, unless people make noise, it's going to lay on somebody's desk or thrown away in a basket.
That's exactly right. And I always bring up President Trump at this point when people make that comment, because he was sitting there in December in the Oval Office with a mountain of physical evidence of fraud, a mountain of electronic evidence of fraud. He was missing two things. One, he had an American public caught flat-footed, like deer in the headlights. They didn't know what happened. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what happened. So it's hard to do. And he didn't have a single legislature that would stand with him. So in other words, evidence isn't what wins the day. The people win the day. And besides, this is what America is. America is a country, it's an experiment in self-government. And for too long, we've been paying other people to run our government, paying other people to teach our children, paying other people to run our elections. It's time we step up and take it back. So really, even though I'm focused on elections, what I'm really doing is waking up the people and teaching them that they need to reintegrate their civic responsibilities and their normal lifestyles. And as that's happening, it's not just a civic reawakening around the country, it's also a spiritual reawakening. It's pretty exciting to see.
You know, it seems like it also removes from the equation the courts, which is a pleasure, because unfortunately, many of the courts have, during this past election cycle, talk about no standing. You have no standing to move forward, which means exactly what you say, have all the evidence in the world. So now you've taken government out of the equation. You've taken the courts out of the equation, but you've putting we the people, of the people, and by the people, and for the people directly in the equation. And enough public pressure, that's what you're talking about, within a peaceful means. We always say that, within the framework of the law, enough public pressure is going to really, really raise hell, if you will. And somebody's going to say, we better do something. Now, my question to you is this. So all of this goes on with the people, but there may come a time when the people have to go to court, meaning they have to file some sort of charges, ethical or whatever, against government officials who are not going to move on it.
Yeah. And I don't object to that. I have a love-hate relationship with lawsuits, I like to tell people, because I've been in many now and across the country, and they never come out the way we want. But so that's my hate part. My love part is that we get to have discovery and we get to put them in the witness stand. I give you an example. When I was in the state of Oregon last year, we got to put the county clerk in the witness stand and got her to admit under oath that she's the one who turns the modems on the machines that are behind the air gap. Okay. And in other words, they're not supposed to be connected to the internet. And plus, even the attorney general of the state of Oregon admitted that their machines were wirelessly hackable. So on the one hand, I don't like the outcomes of the cases, but on the other hand, I love it that we get to put into evidence, formal evidence, proven in court, exactly what we've been talking about. So that's why I have a love-hate relationship.
People will now say, well, now we're talking about money. We're talking about we'd have to hire attorneys, go to court. But I am guessing, and you've been around the country, but as well as I have, but I'm guessing that there may be some lawyers out there that may say, we'll take it pro bono. We'll step up and we'll be part of that team, if you will, that you talked about putting together. And if we have to go to court, we'll do it.
There are some that are doing that. There's one in California in particular that I particularly am fond of, and he's donating all of his time, but he has a big staff. And he needs the big staff to do some of the work that we need him to do. So we do fundraisers to help pay for that. And so we do need money. And when I travel around, all I ask is for my expenses to be paid. So I often do fundraisers for people. I'll say, look, let's promote a big event. I'll bring you in big name people. And then you can raise $10,000, $20,000 at a single event. I'm not charging anything. And you can raise money and that'll help pay the attorneys. We're not looking to make attorneys rich in this process. And I'm not interested in hiring people that are just in it for the money. You need lawyers that are really in it for the real battle.
You know, it seems to me that both political parties, if not more than the two we have, Democrat and Republican, would support this because they both benefit from this if you have election integrity, if you will. Now, I would say that maybe there are power brokers that in between all of this and say, whoa, wait a minute, we're not going to be able to pull this and do that and on and on and on. But I could see how these political parties could commit political suicide if they don't support something like this.
I'm really glad you raised that issue. I remind people that from 2016 to 2020, Hillary Clinton was going around the country screaming bloody murder that the Russians hacked our elections. And she brought in federal testimony and hired academics to study the election systems. And so for 4 years, we had a horrible hackable system. And then suddenly, after 2020, it was the most secure election in history. And then the Republicans are screaming bloody murder. So what are we going to do? Keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? No, we have to fix the problem. But I think this is a big lesson that I had to learn. And I've learned it in the last 2 years. It's not about Republican and Democrat. Some of the most corrupt legislatures, some of the most corrupt elections in our country are in Republican states. And I love your phrase. In fact, I might steal it about power brokers. What's really happened is over the last 20 years, the state governments have centralized control of the elections. And by centralizing control of the elections, they've centralized control, they've centralized power. And, what's the first rule of government? You never, ever, ever give government power, because if you do, you never get it back, not even for 3 weeks to flatten the curve. So what's happened is it's equal in both Republican and Democrat states. The legislatures like having central control of their elections. And I'll give you one example to prove my point. The state of Wyoming, which voted more for Trump than any other state in the country, they vote 3-1 for Trump, and they're registered like 8-1 Republican. I mean, they're incredibly Republican. Well, last year, when they replaced Liz Cheney, the people got all worked up and replaced Liz Cheney. They also elected a new Secretary of State, and his name is Chuck Gray. I really like Chuck. I've met with him on multiple occasions now. He's a good guy. He's a true patriot, and he wants to fix their elections. So here we go. We put Chuck Gray into office, and the very first thing the legislature wants to do is take away election authority from the Secretary of State. I think that is like the perfect example of what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat. It's really more about power. And I like your phrase, power brokers. The power brokers are not going to be willing to reform this without pressure from the bottom up.
And, I've always contended that the people should be the power brokers. The people should break the backs
We
of
the
the
people.
elitist, of the corporate influences, and on and on and on. And Dr. Frank, that's the problem I think we have at the root cause of all the problems we have is apathy. Now you're giving a solution here that I've never heard before. I mean, this is fantastic because this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not carrying somebody else's message. Well, the Chinese did it and the Russians did it, and on and on and on. But what you're sharing with the people is we have a problem, but we can solve it. And to me, that is fantastic. Now, there's two things on my mind as you're speaking with me. Young people, high school students, college students. I'm thinking, boy, what a great part of curriculum regarding American elections this would be in schools. Is there a possibility that could happen down the road?
You really think public schools would talk about this? I don't think so.
No, but what I do think is
maybe private schools might.
Private schools will, and I think that other types of educational institutions will. But I'm also thinking about this. I'm finding that parents whose children are in public schools, they feel there's no way out. They can't afford the private schools. Right. School choice, I'm in favor of. But saying that, I could picture where things have gotten so bad, and I've seen it myself, where parents will come together through their PTA groups and say, well, let's have a Zoom meeting. Let's have some sort of a sit down with an expert like you. Teach our children about election integrity. They hear about this. They talk about it, but they don't know what to do about it. So perhaps down the road, maybe that's something you can think about.
I've already been invited and already done a few of those.
That's great.
And I 100% agree. I think our young people don't have a clue what we've lost as a country. I know I have three of my own children, 25, 23, and 21 years old. And even though they're smart, even though they believe me, even though they've been raised with patriotic, good American values, good Christian values, they don't realize what they've lost. You and I realize what we've lost because we were around 40 years ago, okay? They don't know. And so we need to do our best to help the next generation understand how precious our freedom is and how we're about to lose it. I think Reagan quoted somebody, or if it wasn't him himself, what he said, every generation has to renew that commitment to freedom or we'll lose it.
Dr. Frank, as you know, I shared with you our broadcast is globally, but we have been working very, very hard here at Campaign for America to assist the Canadian people through the crisis that they're facing. I mean, it's really bad. The Chinese Communist Party has influenced the way their government is leaning. The Trudeau's policies and the parliament members supporting him are not serving the best interests of the people, at least in my view. But saying that, I could imagine the Canadians watching now are saying, well, this is good for America, but what about us? Is Dr. Frank willing to help us here in Canada with our election? So there you go. Can you do that?
I haven't looked at a province yet. I haven't looked at any of those data. I'm perfectly willing to, if they would like me to engage with them. I would admit I'm in the dark right now. I've analyzed down to the precinct level 3,000 counties in America now. There are only 3,142, and I've done 3,000 of them. And I'm been to 46 states, so I'm very familiar with the American situation. But that's been my total focus for 2.5 years. If somebody up there is interested, I'm more than willing to look. We'll just have to talk about a strategy. I don't charge for any of the work I do. I don't want anybody to think that I'm doing this for money. So I learned that from Mike Lindell when he discovered me at the beginning. He made a movie about me called Scientific Proof, and we were sitting around the table talking about it. And he pays for everything out of his own money. And just the other day, I was inviting him out to an event in California, and I said, "Don't worry about the money. We're going to raise the money to pay for your plane and everything." He said, "Nope." He says, "I pay for everything myself because I don't want anybody to think that I'm grifting this." I appreciate that, and that is exactly. I'm the same way. So I'd have no enemy and no reason to not help Canada as well. But I have to admit, I'm a pretty patriotic guy. I'm pretty American.
Yeah.
But I would be happy to look. Maybe I can help them too.
Well, they're great people, and they're really sincere in trying to preserve their freedoms and liberties. So I'm going to try to facilitate something for you in Canada.
I'm willing to look. Sure.
You mentioned something earlier that raised my ears a little in a good way, and that was the spiritual aspect of what we're involved in. Look, I've been involved in politics my whole adult life, been elected to several offices, on and on and on. But I've noticed a common thread, and that is the need to start looking at not the issues that we're addressing should not only be from a political or economic perspective, but a spiritual perspective. I believe that we've got to, in America, and I'm sure the Canadians would agree, and others around the world, we've got to find our way back to God. We have to find our way back to prayer. You're doing God's work. I'm convinced of that. I mean, especially when you're like us. We just don't like to ask people for money, and we do the best we could to foot the bill. And then when things happen, well, they happen. But at the end of the day, we're very prayerful. So would you please touch upon that spirituality? Now, Campaign for America. Let me tell you a little story. When we launched Campaign for America, it's a secular broadcast. Okay, we call it the secular podium, if you will. But I promised God that.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, I promised God that I would not put him in the back seat of this great work, and that he'll become the guy in the front seat. So now we've transitioned from, we still have the secular podium, but now we have the secular pulpit. But in that secular pulpit, we make sure that each and every broadcast, we talk about what is the most important thing to us, and that's our relationship with God, with Christ, with the Savior. And so if you don't mind, and I wouldn't bring it up with a guest unless, I hear them say something, and you did. so forgive me if I'm stepping over the boundaries here. I respect everyone. But
No
would you please expound upon that a little for our viewers?
I'm unashamedly evangelical Christian. Okay, so we just set that aside,
Okay.
and I definitely am doing God's work. If this was just like one politician versus another, I'm not sure whether God would take sides on that one. But I know that this is a battle of good versus evil, and so I know God's involved in this one, and I've answered the call. I always joke with people. God sent Jonah to Nineveh to get the Ninevites to repent, and Jonah didn't want to do it, and so God had to swallow him up in a fish and spit him up on the beach. I'm going to go to Nineveh the first time because I don't want to smell like a fish. So I'm answering the call right off the bat. And besides, it's an honor. It's exciting to be alive during this time of what I believe is a spiritual reawakening. You'll remember that when our country was formed, at its founding, we were in the midst of a massive, it's called the First Great Awakening. George Whitefield, the famous evangelist, was traveling up and down the coast, the East Coast, and they were having massive revivals. And to Tocqueville showed up 40 years later and wrote about America. And he said, no wonder the American leadership was willing to trust their people with a republic, because those people over there are virtuous. And he talked about that. And, if you read the writings of Sam Adams and you read the writings of our founding fathers, they say right out, we're assuming that we have a virtuous people, a people that are religious. Our Constitution assumes it. Our Constitution is powerless if our people lack virtue. And so there's an idea in that called the Golden Triangle of Liberty. And in order for us to experience liberty, we have to have virtue. In order to have virtue, we got to have faith. And in order to practice our faith, we got to have liberty. And that golden triangle of liberty is a core idea of our country. And if there's any doubt that we've lost our virtue as a country, if there's any confusion in anybody's mind that we are depraved, that we have lost sight of God, and that we are losing our virtue, you just have to simply point out, we don't know the difference between an innie and an outie. And that's about as basic as it gets. Okay. I mean, that God created male and female. He created them in the beginning. He told us to be fruitful and multiply. What are we doing? We're murdering our babies. So if there's any doubt in anybody's mind that we're depraved, that, we've lost our way, we need to wake up. And so I'm thinking that this is also a spiritual reawakening of our country. I'm very excited about that. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere where a group of people were in the 1700s praising the Republic, saying this is great. This is great for the people. And I believe, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that it was Ben Franklin who kind of said, well, if you could hang on to it.
Yeah, it was when he came out of the Constitutional Convention, and Miss Powell, approached him and said, "What kind of government have you given us?" I mean, they could have given us a dictatorship. They could have given us a democracy. He said, "We've given you a republic if you can keep it." And there's an excellent book by Eric Metaxas called "If You Can Keep It," where he reviews a lot. I just read it on a plane a few months ago. Outstanding book. And it convicted me in one way. You know, there were multiple assumptions our founding fathers had. One of them is that we'd be a religious, virtuous people. Another one is that we would all be well armed and proficient. And I have to admit, I've got my handgun. I can protect myself and my family. Each of my family members has a weapon. They can protect themselves. But can I really protect my community with that? No. So for Christmas, I got myself an AR, and I got my wife a Henry rifle on her birthday that she really had her eye on in February. So guess what? Now we are well armed and proficient. Now I could step up and be part of a militia if necessary, and I practice. And so there are a lot of those things. We're upside down as a country when Antifa comes to town. If your first impulse is to call the cops, that's wrong. If Antifa comes to town, your first impulse should be to grab your AR, and then you call your neighbors and you go take care of business, because we're self-government. That is our country. And then you call the sheriff the next day to clean up the mess. The sheriff, the legislature, they do the paperwork afterwards. They codify what the people are doing. We're self-government. And so, it's been an eye-opener for me too. I have 60 scientific publications. I cover articles on leading journals in the world. I spent all those years in the lab doing my inventing and my science and everything. But you know what? I'm guilty of not doing my part all those years. I mean, I voted, but that's like the minimum. That we need to be involved in our own government and involved in our own education, involved in our own elections. And so I'm stepping up, trying to be a good citizen. I've learned my.
Well, you certainly are. I've shared with the people that those of our founding fathers fought as all the way up to the recent history here in America, fought and died on battlefields for the Constitution of the United States, for our Bill of Rights. And they gave us those tools to use so that we don't have to fight with weapons of war. I believe that, the law's on our side. We have to learn how to use it. And like you said, you have a Second Amendment, you have a First Amendment, we have all these amendments to the Constitution and our Bill of Rights that are prepared for us to use, not for the government, but against the government when the government oversteps their bounds. And so I think we have a duty and obligation to future generations, as well as an obligation to those who fought in the past, to use those tools. And of course, the great tool, as we mentioned before, is the Bible, the Word of God.
Oh, yeah. I love reading my Bible. I take it very seriously. I read it in Hebrew and I read it in Greek. So that tells you how serious I am about it. I think I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that.
You were talking about the Bible. You read it in Hebrew?
Before that, you were saying civic responsibilities. That's all right. Don't come back.
Our duty and obligation. That happens to me all the time. But, I wrote that down. If you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
I'm gonna get that book. I love to read. And I think, another thing before we wrap things up.
Sure.
I think it's important for people to read, to learn, to delete all the disinformation that's coming out, to pay no attention to it. A man once said to me, in fact, he was a liberal Democrat. He said, look, there's not much we really have to do to spread false information. All we have to do is put a paragraph out and you guys will spread it all over. You'll say, look, you're doing our work. So we need to stop doing the work of the opposition, shut them down, and start putting the truth out.
I agree. I remember my train of thought. I was going to say, I gave 300 presentations in 2022. I was out there working hard. All around the country, people are learning the Constitution again. It's a little game I'll play. I'll ask people, do you know the 5 rights guaranteed to you by the First Amendment? And people don't know them. It's shocking. How can we use them as tools? I liked your comment. People have fought and died so that we would have these tools, and we don't even know what tools we have. So, let's just take the first three. You were freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, right to assemble, right to redress grievances. Those are the five in the First Amendment. Think about what they did during COVID. They were trying to close churches.
Yeah.
They were shutting down speech because you couldn't talk about COVID except the way the propaganda they wanted, right? And that's the press too. They were trying to say you can't assemble. I mean, all of these, they are attacking our fundamental rights. And when there's an emergency, that isn't when you take away the Constitution. When there's an emergency, that's when we need the Constitution the most to restrain our government. But we're upside down as a country. We've lost sight of that. Our people have lost sight of the fact that we're the sovereigns, that we're the government. They work for us.
Well, to wrap things up, as the Bible says, the truth will set you free.
Yep.
And you're bringing forth a lot of truth to the people. And we're going to continue to do that. And I'd love to have you back sometime.
I'd love to, and maybe give an update. Boy, we got stuff happening all over the country.
I'd love to. And I have the website there, folks, especially those in Canada. Now, go to our website. We have a little bar up there that says contact us. If you could get the 2 or 3 citizens together, small start, right, Doc?
I think you need 5 or 6 people to form a team, because it's not just about the data. It's not just about the evidence. You have to form a little movement, and that takes a team of people.
Okay. And so, you know what? To the Canadian people, that's something Trudeau can't shut down. And in America, Biden can't shut down. Yep. You're doing things within the framework of the law, no violence. But right. Boy, I'll tell you, you're doing a lot of great work. Well, Dr. Frank, it has been a pleasure.
Likewise.
And I thank you so much for your good work. And yeah, I love the tie. I like that tie, my friend. So, hey, listen, why don't we, I know it's going to happen. Some Canadian is going to send me a tie with the maple leaf on it. So next time you're on, maybe we could wear that. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Frank. God bless you. Thank you.
You too, sir.
All right, folks, a couple things before we wrap it up. Fascinating conversation. One clarification. No, Dr. Frank did not suggest that people take the law into their own hands. He was bringing up an illustration about why there is a Second Amendment. Obviously, if you legally own weapons and your life is in imminent danger and the police are not there, well, you'll have to exercise good judgment and then do what you have to do to protect yourself with the weapons you have. So he doesn't suggest at all that people not call the police. In fact, the opposite. You call the police if you're in trouble. And obviously, it takes some time for the police to get there. And by all means, no one expects you to stand there if somebody is pointing a gun at you and you have a weapon to use to protect yourself. So please keep that in mind. There are some people that I was reading here kind of misinterpreted what he was trying to say. No violence, folks. But again, you protect yourself to the best of your ability. If you're a legal gun owner and someone is breaking into your home and you feel your life is in imminent danger, well, that's when you have to make a critical decision. But we pray to God that the police get there before such a thing happens. Secondly, you're going to get a kick out of this, folks, because apparently this thing with Trudeau is not stopping. We have a headline here. I'm going to show it to you, folks. Could you see this here? You know who that is, right? Well, I know you're reading it backwards, but that's Justin Trudeau and Taylor Swift. The headline, well, first of all, folks, you can't make this stuff up. The picture of Trudeau says, "It's me, hi." I mean, that's what he's saying there. It's me, Justin Trudeau. Hi, Taylor. The headline is Taylor Swift's tweet has Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in a social media firestorm. Get this, I can't stop laughing. Trudeau blasted for fangirling in Twitter, replied to Taylor Swift. So the fangirling is, I guess, I'm a big fan of yours, Taylor. Come to Canada, please, please come and sing. In fact, maybe sit next to me. Just sit next to me, Taylor. That's what he's saying. But of course, she sent a reply, "Hey, Justin, put out the fires before you even think of tweeting something like that to me." That's what she was saying. Yeah, folks, you can't make this stuff up. Well, listen, it's been a great broadcast, folks. One more thing. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who have sent in contributions. I've got to tell you, those $5 and $10 and $1 and $2 contributions, they've added up. So please consider a contribution. PayPal.me is right there at Campaign for America. And if you'd like to give a contribution by check, go to thepatriotdesk.com and we have a donate button. As you know, I don't normally do this. I've been doing a lot quite often now, because I see where this thing's going. I mean, this thing is going where we're beginning to see tremendous amount of headway and victories in America, and we're beginning to see cracks, okay, in the wall that has been created by the Canadian government. We are seeing cracks there. And at some point in time, I'm going to tell you why I just said that to you. But we're going to need your help, okay? And no government is supporting us. No corporation is supporting us. Only the people. And as long as you're supporting us, that's as long as we're going to stay on. And we're going to do everything we said we would do. That's it, folks. So thank you so much. Next week, we'll have Shawn Buckley on again and another American guest. And thank you for joining me on Tonight in North America. God bless you. Have a great, great week. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers.